Terakhir di pertemuan yang lalu kita masih di ayat 282 surah Al-Baqarah. Dan sebagian besarnya sudah kita sampaikan beberapa penjelasan ringan. Dan kemudian dan sekali lagi kita ingatkan ayat ini ayat yang berbicara tentang transaksi yang sifatnya tidak kontan, ya, tidak tunai, tapi transaksi yang
ya pegang. Em là bạn ra vụ rồi ạ.
Mana na ujian apa kok hari. Bila ke. Bila jam. Apa ke ada. Mau ni.
Ini kenapa? Oh, udah mulai. Yo, ini kali.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
National University, Professor Peter Charles Sinclair Taylor from Murdoch University, Professor Dr. Robert Sibarani MS from Universitas Sumatera Utara, Dr. Zikri bin Muhammad from University Malaysia Terengganu. Honorable Rector of Universitas Malikusaleh, or represented by the Vice Rector, Mrs. Yuli Murshida. Honorable Deans of Universitas Malikusaleh along with the ranks. Honorable the heads of UPT Universitas Malikusaleh. Honorable participants, all committees, and of course, all invited guests. And of course, our guest of honor, Bank Indonesia, represented by Mr. Syahrul SH MSM, Bank Aceh, Waterboom Lok Sumawe, and DPRK Lok Sumawe. First of all, let's praise our God Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful, the creator and sustainer of the universe. Peace be upon Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the last messenger of Allah who has guided human life from the destruction into the right way of Islam. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ade Muana. It is an awesome and precious chance for me to be your master of ceremony in this morning in our big event, the Second International Conference on Social Science, Political Science, and Humanities 2021. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, before we start our agenda for today, there will be reciting the Holy Quran by Mr. Rizky Yunanda MSE. To Mr. Rizky, time is yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
A'udzu billahi minasy syaithanir rajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim.
Caranya itu bubar itu memang seminar penelitian itu buku bisa gaya anak
Ya ayyuhalladzina amanu taqullaha wal tanzur nafsum ma qaddamat lighad. واتقوا الله إن الله خبير بما تعملون. ولا تكونوا كالذين نسوا الله فأنساهم أنفسهم أولئك هم الفاسقون. صدق الله العظيم. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Enchanting the national anthem Indonesia Raya. Audience, please stand up. Please return to the seats. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, step on the following agenda are speeches. The first, A report from Mrs. Dr. Ratri Chandrasari as chairperson. Mrs. Ratri, time is yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Wa ta'ala, for his power and blessings, we are now gathered here offline and online. Actually, this conference is held virtually due to that there is still announcement that we should follow the regulation that we have to apply COVID requirements. And also salawat and salam goes to our Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, his family and friends. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I'm on behalf of International Conference on Social Science, Political Science, and Humanities. It is the second conference in 2021. I would like to welcome everybody offline and online here in this mini studio of ICoSPOLHUM to Visipol Universitas Maluku Saleh. As for your information that this conference will be held for 2 days. The first days for main speakers. Alhamdulillah, we have 4 prominent speakers here. The first is Prof. Edward Aspinall from Australian National University, Australia, and then Prof. Peter Charles Sinclair Taylor from Murdoch University, Australia, and also we have our famous professor, especially in anthropology. He is Mr. Professor Robert Sibarani. And we also have Dr. Zikri Muhammad from University Malaysia Terengganu. Our gratitude to our rector, in this case represented by our Vice Rector for Academic Affairs, Ibu Julie Murshida, PhD. And also our gratitude to our deans of Universitas Maluku Saleh, and then the head of UPT offices, and also our special appreciation to the sponsor that gave a support to our activity. And here already arrived Bapak Syahrul SH MSN from Bank Indonesia. Actually, for sponsorship, we have Bank Aceh, and then from DPRK Loksmawi, and from Waterboom Loksmawi. For your information that up to now, there are 966 participants confirmed registered to the committee, and I do hope that we will come after this. And also we have around 60 presenters, and they will publish their papers in our proceedings that will be issued by Atlantis Press Paris. Atlantis now already joined Springer Nature Group. So that's why they have the platform of Gold Open Access. So I think it's a good platform for our proceedings. And I would like to extend my deepest gratitude to all parties that already support to our conference. We do hope that this conference will give opportunities to our researchers and also for all lecturers or maybe common researchers to disseminate their research. The last but not least, I also give appreciation to the committee of ICoSPOLHUM 2021. And we do hope that you enjoy this conference, and we will see you for the next conference, the third ICoSPOLHUM 2022. Okay, good luck. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the second speech will be delivered by the Dean of Social Science and Political Science Faculty of Universitas Maliku Saleh. To Mr. Dr. Nazaruddin, you might take the floor.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Ala alihi washabihi wa mawala. Ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted and honored to have this opportunity to welcome to the second International Conference on Social Science, Political Science, and Humanities 2021, which is hosted this year by Faculty of Social and Political Science, Universitas Maliku Saleh. As the Dean, I wish to extend a warm welcome to all speakers from various fields of science and universities. Professor Edward Askinal from Australian National University, Australia. Prof. Peter Charles Tyler, University, Australia. Profesor Robert Sibarani MS, Universitas Sumatera Utara, Dr. Zikri bin Muhammad, University Malaysia, Terengganu, and colleagues from various countries and all participants. We are especially honored by the presence of Director Universitas Maliku Saleh, Bapak Profesor Dr. Herman Fitra, represented by Vice Rector for Academic Affairs, Ibu Prof. Julie Mursida. Terima kasih Ibu sudah hadir. And Vice Rector for Finance and Administrative Affairs, Prof. Mukhlis. Thank you very much, Prof. Mukhlis. And all of Dean, Universitas Maliku Saleh, Head of Bureau of Academic, Pak Pusaka nggak ada ya. And all invite guests. Yang lain nggak ada. We also like to thank our sponsor BI Lok Semawe. Thank you very much Pak Syahrul. Bank Aceh Syariah Lok Semawe. Waterboom Mangat Ceria, member of Lok Semawe Host Representative, Bapak T. Sofianus, and all the invited guests. COVID-19 interrupt our normal life and force us to live in new normal area. As a response to this, we invite experts from various disciplines to discuss about this new normal life, which affect various sectors. We would like to take this opportunity to play our part in contributing to the world by providing access to the latest discoveries and new theories in the field of social science, political science, and humanities, as well as providing potential solutions to the current problem that we are all facing in this disruptive era. Therefore, The theme of this year's conference is strengthening the role of social science, political science, and humanities. We do hope that discoveries and theories in social science, political science, and humanities will be able to play their part in solution global problem. I would like also to extend my appreciation to the chairperson of conference organizing committee, Mbak D. Dr. Ratri Chandra, MPD. Thank you very much, and team for making this event possible. Finally, I wish to participate a very fruitful and productive meeting, and with that, I genuinely hope that this international conference will be the annual agenda of Faculty of Social and Political Science, Universitas Malikus Saleh. Thank you very much. Billahi taufiq wal hidayah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much to Mr. Dr. Nazaruddin for the welcoming speech. And Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is our honor to have the Rector of Universitas Malikus Saleh, represented by the Vice Rector of Academic, Mrs. Dr. Julie Murshida, to deliver an opening speech, and afterward we would like to request to Ibu Julie to officially open the second ICoSPOLHUM. Please, time is yours.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Alhamdulillah, puji syukur kepada Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala yang telah memberikan kita kesempatan, kesehatan, sehingga dapat berkumpul di ruangan yang berbahagia ini. Kemudian selawat dan salam mari juga sama-sama kita sanjung sajikan ke pangkuan Nabi besar Muhammad SAW yang telah membawa perubahan besar di dalam kehidupan umat manusia. Bapak Ibu yang saya hormati, izinkan saya berbicara dalam dua bahasa, ya, bahasa Indonesia dan nanti pembukaan dari Bapak Rektor akan saya bacakan dalam bahasa Inggris yang telah disiapkan oleh Pak Rektor. Yang terhormat Bapak Wakil Rektor bidang Administrasi Umum dan Keuangan, yang terhormat Bapak Dekan, terutama Bapak Dekan dari Fakultas Ilmu Sosial dan Ilmu Politik, Bapak-bapak Dekan dari Fakultas yang hadir di sini, dari Fakultas Hukum, kemudian dari Fakultas Kedokteran, kemudian hadir juga Kepala Biro Baksi di sini, ya, kemudian Kepala UPT BKK, kemudian Bapak-bapak Wakil Dekan dari Fakultas Ilmu Sosial dan Ilmu Politik, para Kajur, Sekjur, Kaprodi, kemudian juga panitia yang berbahagia, serta saya lihat juga ada adik-adik mahasiswa yang ikut berpartisipasi di pagi hari ini. Spesial yang terhormat ya untuk para sponsor yang hadir dari Bank Indonesia, ya. Baik Bapak Ibu yang berbahagia, ya, izinkan saya membacakan sambutan dari Bapak Rektor. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very delighted to be here today for the opening of this conference. Let me take the opportunity to welcome you all to the second International Conference on Social Science, Political Science, and Humanities that organized by Faculty of Social and Political Science, Universitas Malikus Saleh. This is the second international conference conducted by the faculty, and I believe that this conference provides a very unique opportunity for all of us, since delegates from all over the world from various backgrounds with wide-ranging knowledge relate to social science, political science, and humanities to get together here to discuss, to share, as well as to provide solution to global issues faced by global community nowadays, especially amid the COVID-19 pandemic. This pandemic has affected the lives of so many people in so many ways. Since it first emerged in China's city of Wuhan in Hubei province, it has rapidly spread globally around the world, posing challenges and severely disrupted the entire human population in health, economy, education, social, and other sectors. The contribution from the academics, researchers, government officials, and other relevant parties to the finding of the research, which then discussed and shared through this conference, is expected to be one of the contributions to address global issues amid the COVID-19 crisis, especially in the social and political fields. In this conference, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to Professor Edward Aspinall, Professor Peter Charles Taylor, Professor Robert Sibarani, Dr. Zikri bin Muhammad as speakers for their willingness to talk at this conference. Many thanks also goes to the presenters, general participants, and invited guests for their participation in this event. Next, I would like to thank to the sponsor for their great support. And last but not least, my highest appreciation goes to the committee members of the second conference 2021 and all parties who have been working very hard to making this event possible. Ladies and gentlemen, by saying Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, I declare the second International Conference on Social Science, Political Science, and Humanities with the theme Strengthening the Role of Social Science, Political Science, and Humanities in the Disruptive Era is officially open. I believe it will be an enjoyable conference, and I wish everyone a fruitful and rewarding conference. Thank you very much. Billahi taufiq walhidayah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Yuli. Please remain on the stage. Mrs. Yuli, please remain on the stage, and we would like to invite the Dean, the representative of Bank Indonesia, Bapak Syahrul SH MSM, please. Mrs. Yuli will present token of appreciation to the sponsors, accompanied by Mr. Dr. Nazaruddin.
Unimal aja coba, unimal. Streaming. Oh, ada.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Recitation of doa by Mr. Rizky Yunanda.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi
A'udzu billahi minasyaitonir rajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin, hamdan na'imin, hamdan syakirin, hamdan yuwafi ni'amahu wa yukafi'u mazidah. يا ربنا لك الحمد كما ينبغي للجلال وجهك الكريم وعظيم سلطانك. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم. اللهم أحسن عاقبتنا في الأمور كلها وأجرنا من خزي الدنيا وعذاب الآخرة. اللهم إنك عفو كريم حليم تحب العفو فاعف عنا يا كريم. اللهم اغفر لنا ذنوبنا وذنوب والدينا وارحمهما كما ربيانا صغيرا، ولجدنا ولجداتنا ولأستاذنا ولمشايخنا ولإخواننا ولجميع المسلمين والمسلمات والمؤمنين والمؤمنات الأحياء منهم والأموات برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم أنزل الرحمة والنعمة والهداية وصبرا علينا وعلى جميع المسلمين والمسلمات. اللهم ارزقنا رزقا جديدا وعمرا طويلا ومالا كثيرا وخيرا قريبا وشرا بعيدا وولدا صالحا وعملا متقبلا وتجارة لن تبور برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. ربنا تقبل منا دعاءنا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا يا مولانا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم والحمد لله رب العالمين. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Sebelum kita menutup acara ini, Bapak Ibu tamu undangan beserta Ibu Wakil Rektor dipersilahkan untuk foto bersama di depan. Bapak Ibu tamu undangan.
Bapak Ibu udah cabur lah saya. Cabur.
Ladies and gentlemen, we now come to the end of opening ceremony. On behalf of the host and committee, we would like to extend once again our deepest appreciation to you all for your participation. Once again, thank you and good morning from Lo Semawe. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Link absen.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, now we will start our session on the second International Conference on Social Science, Political Science, and Humanities 2021 by theme Strengthening the Roles of Social Science, Political Science, and Humanities in the Disruptive Era. Without any further ado, we would like to welcome on stage Mr. Professor Edward from Australia University, and this session will be guided by Mr. Dr. Nirzalin, the Vice Dean of FISIP Universitas Maluku Saleh. Please give a round of applause to both of these gentlemen.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam
Grateful
warahmatullahi
to our God,
wabarakatuh.
Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, who has given us the greatest opportunity to join this international conference with the greatest health and the happiness. Greeting to our Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, who has bring us from the darkness to the lightness and framing our interaction based on knowledge and morality. Honorable to our rector, to our vice rector, to our deans, and our beloved participant of international conference. Today, we feel so happy because we have attended with 4 keynote speakers, the expertise from the fields. The first is from Prof. Edward Espinal, and then Prof. Peter Charles, Prof. Robert Sibarini, and Prof. Zikri bin Muhammad. For these sessions, I will be a moderator, and for the other keynote speaker will be moderate Prof. Muhammad. Ladies and gentlemen, the all participants that we love, as we knew, Prof. Edward Espinal is a familiar expertise the expert one in the social and political science, especially in Indonesia and the Aceh. His writing and his analysis be a reference to many academics and policymakers in the world, especially in Indonesia and Aceh. Prof. Edward Espinal, he is a professor in Australian National University, and his education background is PhD in Political Science, Department of Political and Social Change, Australian National University, and graduates in 2000s, and then BA, Honors, First Class and University Medal, Department of Indonesian and Malayan Studies, Sydney University, graduated in 1991, and Bachelor of Arts, Jurisprudence, Adelaide University, South Australia, graduate in 1989. Ladies and gentlemen, Prof. Edward Espinal will be presents his paper about about pandemic and politics in Indonesia and Southeast Asia. As we know, after pandemic COVID-19, we have many things dynamic in our political fields, especially in Jakarta. Many issues about that, especially about PCR politics and the everything equipment with the COVID-19. And in Aceh, we facing many problems too, especially after conflict or post-conflict era. We have facing with the Wali Nangro problems, and now in Acehese society have many questions about his authority. And many aspects we can hear, we can listen for the civilian. They say that they are very disappointed about the authority of Wali Nangro. So the authority of Wali Nangro, we can say now in declines. And then we, in the other sectors, ex-combatant, we facing the problem with their welfare after post-conflicts. And the third one, we facing the problem with the poverty rate very high in Aceh. So that this problem endangered or facing a problem in our stability of politics. How to develop Aceh, how to develop Indonesia is the biggest problem now. So, ladies and gentlemen, to discuss about this, we give the time for Prof. Edward Espinal to present his fruitful presentation, I think. So for everybody, all of you, listen carefully and give some note from his presentation. For Prof. Edward Espinal, the time is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vice Dean. And let me first say what an honor it is for me to have this opportunity to visit Universitas Maliku Saleh, even if only virtually. It's been several years now since I've had the opportunity to be in Aceh. So I'm not going to speak about the situation in Aceh in my presentation today. But let me say how much I enjoy this opportunity to make connections again with colleagues, esteemed researchers at the Universitas Maliku Saleh, where I know there are many excellent colleagues who do wonderful research. So this is a great honor for me and a great opportunity. I appreciate it. Let me just, now I wanted to share my screen, but it seems I'm not able to do that. So I'll ask Panitia if I can share my screen so I can show my PowerPoint slide for my presentation. Jadi barangkali minta tolong dari panitia agar bisa di-share PowerPoint saya. Tunggu sebentar.
Sorry for people not received yet.
Oh, mau dikirim begitu. Oke. Saya kira bisa share langsung. Maafkan saya, tunggu sebentar.
Share yourself,
Sure.
Prof. Edward. We are not received PPT yet.
Okay.
From you. All right.
Ya, saya kirim. Okay, so I've shared the slides, but let me begin my presentation anyway, and hopefully the slides can catch up. So as we know, the theme of today's presentation is strengthening the roles of social science, political science, and humanities in the disruptive era. Of course, what we mean by the era of disruption is really the digital era. And for me, when we talk about the digital era, we're really talking about a period of information overload. That, you know, an era when kita semua kewalahan dengan berbagai sumber informasi. But we should remember that information is not knowledge, that the multiplication of sources of information that we confront in the contemporary period makes it even more important the multiplication of information in the contemporary period makes rigorous methodology, both quantitative and qualitative, more important than ever. Now I'm just waiting for my slides. I think they should be shared quite soon. In fact, it looks like I can now share my own slides. Excellent. So you can see that, I hope. So here's the conference theme. But in this presentation today, I wish to speak about the disruption caused by the COVID-19 pandemic to the established political order worldwide, in Indonesia, and in Southeast Asia more generally. When we look at the connection between the pandemic and politics, as political scientists, we can ask two big questions, at least two big questions. Firstly, how do politics shape the pandemic? Atau apa saja dampak politik kepada pandemi itu sendiri? And the second question is, how is the pandemic shaping politics? So it's the reverse question. Jadi bagaimana dampak pandemi pada politik secara umum? In this presentation, I will focus on the second of those questions, but I want to also make a few general remarks about the first topic as well. So we're really talking here about different directions of causality. So what about the impact of the politics on the pandemic? So how do political forms, political structures, political movements political ideologies, and so on, shape the way in which the COVID-19 pandemic has moved through the world and caused different levels of mortality and different levels of illness in different countries. One of the first questions we can ask, of course, and there was a lot of debate on this, especially last year in around 2020, what are the effects of different kinds of regime form on pandemic intensity? And in fact, in the political science literature on this topic, there's still quite a bit of debate about whether democratic or authoritarian regimes have been more effective at handling the pandemic. There is some general comparative historical literature which suggests that democracies are in general better equipped to deal with epidemics. But for this recent COVID-19 pandemic, the big factor, of course, is that, well, one of the big questions that arises from the contrast between the differing performance of China and the USA in particular, though many other factors, in fact, in the literature seem to be much more important: government policy, leadership choices, state capacity, and so on. So even here, this is from a few months ago. So this is COVID-19 deaths per million people around the middle of this year. We can see that, for example, there is a big contrast between China and the United States, with the United States having quite a high mortality rate and China having quite a low mortality rate. But we see also that some authoritarian regimes, such as Russia, Iran, and others, also had quite high levels of mortality. Another way to look at the impact of politics on the pandemic is to look at the impact of politics from below. So we could look at the impact of political ideology, partisanship, ideological political attitudes, and so on, where a lot of the most interesting research on this topic has come from the United States. For example, we see in the United States that whether you are identified as a Republican voter or a Democratic voter has a big impact on your attitudes to vaccination, onto wearing masks, and so on. And therefore, you can see in this slide here, for example, that it has quite a big impact on also the levels of the pandemic. In Indonesia, we also know, at least initially, there was quite a lot of hoaxes and hesitancy about the vaccine. But so far, I don't think we've seen much systematic research on this topic. What about the impact of the pandemic on politics? So if we reverse the analytical question and we ask not what is the impact of politics on the pandemic, but how has the pandemic changed politics? Jadi apa saja dampak pandemi COVID-19 pada politik secara global? One of the big results we can see of the pandemic over the last year or so is the acceleration of the worldwide trend of global democratic recession. So those of you who study politics will be familiar with this. I know that, you know, for the last, well, for a long time, those of us who looked at politics internationally, including politics Indonesia, were used to this idea of the third wave of democracy. So this period from the mid-1970s to about 2000, or the late 20th century, when the world experienced sebuah gelombang demokratisasi yang sangat besar skalanya, including Indonesia, actually. So Indonesia was one of the last countries to be affected by this big global democratic wave. Since about, it depends which of the democracy rating agencies you use, whether you look at Freedom House or VDEM or the Economist Intelligence Unit, nevertheless, they all show a similar story, that for the last 10, 15 years or so, the number of countries experiencing experiencing democratic recession, so becoming less democratic, not more democratic, has increased globally. And we see in these figures, which are from VDEM, that this trend accelerated very rapidly in 2020 during the pandemic. So for example, on the left-hand graph, we see that 25 countries became less democratic and only 16 became more democratic in 2020. If we look at the right-hand side, that looks at the proportion of the world's population, and we see that autocratization or democratic recession affected more and more people internationally last year. So it seems that there is a big impact of the pandemic on global democratic recession, and it has had a big accelerating accelerating effect. Now we know also that during this period of global democratic recession, the typical pattern of democratic backsliding is not like in the past, in the previous period, in the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, and so on. The typical pattern of democratic breakdown was via a military coup, so coup d'état militaire. We've seen some cases of this in recent years, like in Myanmar, also in Thailand, but that's actually quite unusual in the contemporary world. The most common method of democratic decline in the contemporary period is what is sometimes called executive aggrandizement. So in other words, concentration of power by leaders who are already elected, but use that power in order to reduce the opportunities for criticism, for opposition, for mobilization, for control of the government by countervailing forces. So it makes sense then if we can think about what are the mechanisms that connect the pandemic with accelerated democratic decline, that we can look at the same pattern that we looked at the question of the effects of politics on the pandemic, i.e. we can look from above and we can look from below. So from above, we can imagine, we can see that in many countries, governments use the pandemic as both an excuse, so excuse, like pembenaran or dalih, and an opportunity to increase their power at the opportunity of potential countervailing forces, both in politics and society. And because after all, as we know, the pandemic required emergency measures, restrictions on movement and so on. But many countries also used these, or governments in many countries also use this opportunity to restrict political opposition. But what about from below? If we look at questions of ideology and political attitude, perhaps it's possible that in the pandemic situation, when people's lives are in danger, that they too will support more authoritarian measures. And that's what we wanted to look at in the research I'm going to tell you about now. So we know, of course, that Southeast Asia has not been immune from the global democratic recession. Southeast Asia has always been a mixed region, with some countries more democratic than others, some being quite authoritarian. We have Communist Party governments still in some parts of mainland Southeast Asia. But in those countries which became democratic during the third wave, we know that there have been pressures towards democratic decline or backsliding for some time. Perhaps the most obvious case is the Philippines under President Duterte, who has said he's been willing to use to abandon the rule of law and use violence against not only criminals, but also his political opponents. In Thailand, we know, of course, that there was the military coup in 2014. In case of Indonesia, most analysts of Indonesian politics agree that there has been a gradual democratic decline since around the period that President Jokowi came to power. And we know that this is associated with the increased political polarization that occurred at that time. But we've seen many examples of this. It's not a dramatic democratic decline, but most analysts would agree that the quality of Indonesia's democracy has significantly declined over the last few years. In the COVID era, we saw an acceleration of these trends in many countries. So most obviously in Myanmar with the military coup of February this year. Thailand, we saw a lot of confrontation between government and opposition. Malaysia, for a period, saw emergency rule, which allowed a basically minority government to remain in power. Philippines, we saw very harsh measures against well, not only in terms of the COVID restrictions, but also against various critics of the government moving against the media, and so on. In Indonesia, we saw the controversy around the Omnibus Law, the weakening of the KPK. As you know, the KPK was such an important institution preventing corruption in Indonesia, but now is much, much weaker than it used to be, and now is really a kind of, what do we call it, a toothless tiger, macam ompong, certainly compared to what it used to be. What about, so we can see that from above, governments are taking the opportunity of COVID to engage in what is called executive aggrandizement. The weakening of the KPK, in fact, is a classic move of the kind we see in the contemporary period of democratic backsliding, where an executive government takes action to weaken a horizontal control agency. What about from below? What about social attitudes? Do we think, or do we find that the COVID pandemic made the population of Southeast Asia more supportive of more authoritarian government? So to answer this question, some colleagues and I from ANU, but also from several other universities, carried out a survey in the middle of this year, so around April, May, so before the really bad Delta wave hit most countries of Southeast Asia, with 6,000 respondents across 5 countries: Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Singapore, Philippines. It was an online survey because, of course, it's very hard to do face-to-face research in the middle of a pandemic. But we wanted to know what effect was the pandemic having on people's political attitudes, in particular on their support for authoritarian measures and for democracy or authoritarianism as a system of government. You can see quite a bit of variation in the patterns that we uncovered, in fact. So, for example, when we asked respondents whether they were satisfied with the way their government had been handling the pandemic, we see very, very high levels of satisfaction in Singapore. Now, this is not surprising. Generally speaking, in public opinion research, we find Singaporeans generally strongly in favor of their government and tend to have quite authoritarian political attitudes. The interesting one here for me as well is actually the very high levels of satisfaction in Indonesia. Now, this is before the big Delta wave in July, August, yeah, when the hospitals became overwhelmed in some parts of Indonesia. But nevertheless, it shows that at this time, there's quite high satisfaction with the handling of the COVID-19 pandemic by Indonesian respondents. So I should say, by the way, that because this is an online survey, it means that most of the respondents were people who have access to the internet. So it tends to be a rather middle class, highly educated group of respondents. So not capturing people in remote or rural locations, for example. We also asked this question about whether people thought that the pandemic meant for them, the lesson of the pandemic was that their country needed a strong government that puts less emphasis on individual rights. Jadi apakah diperlukan sebuah pemerintahan kuat yang tidak begitu menjunjung tinggi hak-hak individual, or does the pandemic show us that we need a government that protects individual rights? And you can see that the strongest support for protection of individual rights, the strongest support for individual rights is actually in the two most democratic countries in our sample. So very, very strong in the Philippines, almost 2/3. And we should remember this is under the presidency of President Duterte, who is seen as someone who doesn't care at all about individual rights. So we see quite a bit of opposition here, actually, to the president's attitude. And Indonesia, well, is quite, it's quite balanced, but still quite a lot of support for the protection of democratic rights. Not surprising, the lowest support for democratic rights in Singapore, in the country where we see historically quite a lot of support for its semi-authoritarian form of political rule. One factor we look at as well was the role of income. So the top bars in these fields are people who are relatively wealthy. So these are people who, if the question is, if you have thinking about your monthly income, do you have enough to save every month? Do you have enough just for your living expenses? Do you have barely enough, or do you need help? So this is quite interesting. In some countries, it shows that definitely the richer people are more in favor of more authoritarian government. So in Singapore, for example, if you compare the top lines to the bottom lines, you see quite a lot of emphasis or quite a lot of support for a strong government that doesn't put emphasis on individual rights in the wealthiest group, and much less support, well, significantly less support, more evenly split amongst those who are poorer. In some countries, you can see, Philippines, for example, the poorer people, the people who are less wealthy, the people who need help to get by every month, are the people who are most strongly in favor of a government that protects individual rights. Indonesia is quite interesting, very little variation, right? So you see very little variation by income group that basically it's evenly split across the whole population. Let me show the next slide. We also asked about various emergency measures. So we asked, if the pandemic gets worse, would you support your government taking the following actions? And we included there a curfew. So a curfew is like jam malam, as an example of an action which is directly linked and can be justified as a control measure towards COVID. But we also included measures which are less directly connected. For example, we asked, if the COVID pandemic gets worse, do you support your government censoring the media in your country? Do you support getting the military involved in your government? And you can see there's actually a lot of variation. So this is from across all countries. You can see there's a lot of variation in this case. So curfews get a lot of support, big majority support, but censoring media does not get much support at all. In fact, there's quite strong, almost 2/3 opposition to this measure. So in other words, there's not total support or uniform support for more authoritarian measures as a result of the pandemic across Southeast Asia. It's also interesting here, this is a bit complicated, so I'll give you some time to look at it. So the colors depend which of those questions, which show which of those questions we just asked about. And you can see that there are quite different patterns across the various countries. Interestingly, Indonesia comes out as a country that actually has quite strong support for most of the authoritarian measures we asked about. So for example, it's the highest on the gray bar, which is getting the military involved. So 69% of people agreed that it would be appropriate for the government to get the military involved in government in response to the COVID crisis. Compare that to example to Thailand, where there has recently been a military coup, and the numbers are almost double, right? So Thailand 35, Indonesia 69. So I think this shows that there's quite a strong legacy of the Dwi Fungsi period, the Dwi Fungsi ideology in Indonesia, that legacy of accepting military engagement in politics remains quite strong. But also quite strong support, for example, suspending freedoms in order to deal with the COVID pandemic in Indonesia as well. So interestingly, quite a lot of support for these various measures in the Indonesian case. And in fact, when you add these up, you can see that, in fact, by response, the country where the respondents had the strongest authoritarian response to these questions was, in fact, Indonesia. Very different, for example, to Thailand, where most people disagreed with these measures. In Indonesia, there was a composite average of about 20%. So quite a lot of strong support for that measure in the Indonesian case. So it seems that, in fact, if we compare across these countries, interestingly, it seems that the strongest support for more authoritarian or more anti-democratic measures in response to COVID is actually strongest in Indonesia. And it's quite interesting because in many ways, Indonesia is the most democratic of these different countries at the present time. We should also note that preliminary regression analysis we have been doing suggests that, in fact, one of the factors that is most influential is close contact with COVID. So for respondents who said that they had a family member who died of this disease, this had the strongest effect in increasing their support for authoritarian measures. And this is consistent with a lot of the literature in political psychology, which suggests that istilahnya threat salient, the term they use is threat salient. So if a threat, so like an ancaman, becomes more real for people, then this makes them adopt more authoritarian political attitudes. But the question here is, how long-lasting will that effect be? So if it's really about people fearing for their own lives, it might mean that once the COVID pandemic passes, that people's attitudes will become more democratic again. So some preliminary conclusions, because we are still seeing the results of this in real life, in real time. So it seems that the Southeast Asia democratic recession is accelerating as a result of COVID, as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. The key mechanism comes really from above, that this is from initiatives taken by mostly elected governments to engage in executive aggrandizement is the term that's often used. So to executive governments to increase their power at the expense of civil society, political opposition, and horizontal control institutions. So as I said before, the weakening of the KPK is a good example of this mechanism working in the Indonesian case. But when we look about whether the public supports this move towards more authoritarian government in response to the pandemic, we can see there's quite mixed results from our survey. That Southeast Asian publics are not giving uniform or blanket support for democratic recession. So there's not support for all sorts of authoritarian measures. Even when we ask about, do you think we need a government that supports individual rights or one that doesn't emphasize individual rights, we see quite a lot of division on that topic. And instead, there's quite a lot of selective responses in which respondents support some measures such as curfews, but oppose others such as censoring the media, but also quite a bit of variation across countries. So strong support in Indonesia for backsliding, quite a lot of opposition in Thailand. And as I said, it seems that those who have the most severe impact of COVID are most supportive. So maybe this effect will fade over time. So I think there's still a lot of research for us to do on how this massive event of the COVID-19 pandemic is reshaping politics in both Indonesia, Southeast Asia, but also globally. There's a lot we don't know about these sorts of patterns of political attitude change. We don't know, for example, yet to what extent public support for authoritarian responses is a function of pandemic severity. There's some support in Europe, or some research in Europe, for example, which suggests this might be giving rise to long-term changes in political attitudes, but we don't know that yet. To what extent is a result of demographic and other political factors? To what extent do they explain some of these differences? And perhaps one possible interpretation is the pandemic is simply accelerating disillusionment with existing government, whether authoritarian or democratic. So that might, for example, explain the difference between the results in Thailand and those in Indonesia, where in Indonesia, respondents seem to be most authoritarian, but in Thailand, they seem to be most democratic, presumably reflecting their recent experiences with military government. So that's it for my slides. Thank you for your patience. And thank you once again for this opportunity to speak to you today. It's my great honor and my great privilege to participate in this event from Universitas Maliku Saleh. Thank you very much.
Pesannya? Pesan chat. Aduh, Ruang.
Thank you, Prof. Edwards. We give applause for the grateful presentation from Prof. Edwards.
Thank you.
From the fruitful presentation, we can underline some notes. We can take some underlined notes from the fruitful presentation, Prof. Edward. The first is Indonesia vaccine hesitance and hoax. And the second, Indonesia gradual democratic decline now in the era of COVID-19. And then strong government that put less emphasis on individual rights. Okay, because of time, our beloved participants, we have time now to give the questions for Prof. Edwards. We have only, unfortunately, we have only 2 questions. So for the all participants, if you have a question, please raise your hands. Or from the chat. Our participant, if you have a question, please raise your hand or you can write in the chat. Okay, if we don't have the question, I think from Muhammad Ali, what is your question? Oh no, okay. If we don't have the question, I think this session is finished, so we can go to the other keynote speaker. Thank you very much for Edward Espinal for your fruitful presentations. To the other keynote speaker, the second keynote speaker is Prof. Peter Chaleh will be moderate Prof. Muhammad. Prof. Muhammad, the time for you, please.
Thank you, Professor Nizarlin. Before we start the second speaker, I would like to request special request to Professor Edward Espinal for if we could have the PowerPoint to be sent to the organizer, so we could distribute to the participant. Perhaps because of the technical shortcoming, and therefore it's a bit difficult for some participant to grasp whatever you have presented just now. Perhaps by the time the participant would have the presentation with them, they could read it and fully understand the presentation, and perhaps later at the end of the presentation of the rest of the speakers, we will have a wrap up of the question and answer, and inshallah we'll have also for the question that forwarded to you. Thank you for Professor Edward Espinal. And now, brothers and sisters and all participants of Second International Conference, I would like to invite our honorable speakers. There will be Professor Taylor and then Professor Robert Sibarani, and finally Professor Zikri. And they will be presenting their paper respectively. And based on the running down of the conference, the second speaker would be Professor Taylor. And beforehand, I would like to introduce Professor Peter Charles Sinclair Taylor. He authored many books and also has authored many articles published in international journals. If you can see from his publication, he is a very distinguished scholar on transformative education. So he would talk about transformative education and in the era of disruptive era. And then I'm not going to read one by one his CV. Only short introduction I could do. That Professor Peter is now Director of the International Transformative Education and Research Network at Adjunct Professor of Murdoch University School of Education, Australia. And then during 3 decades of Ed Curtin University Graduate Center of Science and Mathematical Education, Professor Peter developed a model of progressive research as transformative learning that engaged STEM teachers and teachers education in exploring their culture histories, reconceptualizing their professional practices, and developing their agencies as inspiring leaders. Engaging stories of these educators' transformative learning experience are recounted in a recent book co-edited with Professor Balchandra Lute. Research as Transformative Learning for Sustainable Future, Local Voice and Vision. This will be published by Brill Sense in 2019. Peter continued to support the visionary leadership of his graduate as they transform teachers' education program in the university across Asia, Africa, and Middle East and the Pacific. He shares with Dr. Elizabeth Lilly Taylor a vision of education for cultural and educational but sustainable for developing young people ethical and spiritual value, which is the focus of their forthcoming co-edited book, Transformative STEM, STEAM, Education for Sustainable Future, that will be published by Brill in 2022. Host, could you please connect us to Professor Peter, please? Professor Peter.
Good morning, Selamat pagi.
Good day. How are you?
Very well, thank you. It's lovely to be here. It's a great honor, in fact. And
Professor Edward Aspinan, and also we have Professor Peter with us. And then we have also Professor Robert from Medan, and also we have Associate Professor from Terengganu, Malaysia. So it is really great opportunity for us to learn many new issues, particularly on, we have discussed just now about with Professor Aspinall, is about the response of the Southeast Asian population on whether the government should take the lead to authoritarianism, or it is more to policies that civil approach. And now I would like to invite Professor Peter to deliver your speech that perhaps would be on the transformative education. So please welcome Professor Peter.
Okay, many thanks, and it's lovely to be here. I visited Loxamawe in 2019. It was a short visit, and I only wished I had longer to be there. One day, when this pandemic has disappeared from our world, we'll be able to have more face-to-face meetings, which are far more enjoyable, I must say, than looking at a computer screen. But at least, you know, we have an opportunity now to be able to have some communications. So I'm going to share my screen. Here we go. And I'd like you to let me know whether you can see that. Okay, I now have my PowerPoint open. Is that visible to you at your end?
It is visible.
Oh, excellent. Okay, well, thank you very much. So it's a great opportunity here to visit you and also to be part of this multidisciplinary conference. Usually I'm invited to speak at conferences that specialize in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. But the message that I want to deliver is one of multidisciplinarity or interdisciplinarity, and it will link pretty much to what Edward was saying in his presentation. So as you've introduced me, yes, I'm the director of the International Transformative Education and Research Network, and I'd like to just say a few words about that before I continue. We have groups, transformative education research groups in various countries, and as you can see in Indonesia, there are 4 universities that actively belong to this organization, this network. And we launched the network in Indonesia in 2019 during my last visit. And you may recognize some of your colleagues here from Jakarta, Surabaya, Medan, and Malang. Most of whom, the first 3 on the left are my doctoral graduate students, and they are now exercising great transformative leadership in their respective universities in teacher education. Here's the launch of TERG Indonesia back in 2019. I think there's a bit of a gender imbalance. We'd like to see a few more males involved. So my background is my first degree. I majored in physics, and I've been a science educator and a mathematics educator as a teacher in schools, and then as I moved into the university sector in teacher education. So science and mathematics was my primary field of interest, if you like, my discipline. And so you wouldn't be surprised to know that I find the modern technological developments of great interest and excitement, but also of some degree of concern. And that concern is what I want to share with you today. We have many amazing developments these days, and here's just a few images to illustrate that.
Bisa kakak turunkan ke sini
I have a few odd voices coming in sideways here. So we're currently in the what is called the Industrial Revolution 4.0, or the digital era, as Edward was referring to. Probably one of the most remarkable events recently has been the giving of citizenship to the world's first robot. It's Sophia up here. So robotics and humanity are converging in many ways. And this actually gives me some cause for concern. It won't be far off before we have human-like robots, which we call humanoids, being very independent and going out to dinner, as humans might do. And at this point, there's a book called The Technological Singularity, and that is the moment in history in which human intelligence and artificial intelligence meet. Now, that's a very debatable subject because we have to ask, what do we mean by intelligence? But some people say that we're only 10 to 15, 20 years away from that moment in time. Science fiction movies are exploiting this wonderful imaginative opportunity, which is becoming more and more realistic. And there's a book here called the Turing Test, which is a test that is performed on robots to see, in fact, how close are they to converging on human beings. So this, of course, raises all sorts of ethical questions about human well-being. What does it mean to be fully human, as opposed to what does it mean to be a robot? Should artificially intelligent machines have human rights? You know, as they become closer and closer to be fully human, should we treat them like humans? Do they have human rights or not? Should we teach ethical design standards? So people who are in the business of creating these machines, should they be using ethical design standards to ensure that humanity is safe from runaway robots? And we've seen plenty of science fiction movies about exactly that. And should we include, therefore, ethical values in teaching of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics? Now, anytime you see the word should, it raises the question of values, and in particular, ethical values. And that is the primary focus of what I'm talking about today, the role of ethical values in STEM education. Partly answered that third question, should we teach ethical design standards, by a report that's been released just recently in Europe, where there are ethical considerations being laid down as standards for the development of artificial intelligence. Let me jump back a little bit to the 18th century, because we had the beginning of the Anthropocene epoch, and Professor Paul Crutzen in 1995 was awarded a Nobel Prize for his work in articulating and defining this new epoch. And here's a quote from a publication of his: "The human imprint on the global environment has now become so large and active that it rivals some of the great forces of nature in its impact on the functioning of the Earth system." In other words, we have developed our technologies to such an extent that we are actually altering many of the natural systems of the planet. And if I go to the next slide, we can see that as a result of that, we are now in an era of great environmental sustainability crises. Reports on these from the International Panel on Climate Change. There's the new Plastics Economy report from the World Economic Forum, and there's the Global Biodiversity Outlook, and there's Biocultural Diversity Conservation. So each of these reports touches on a particular part of the sustainability crises that we're experiencing. And we've just seen this currently a huge meeting of political leaders in Scotland, in Glasgow, to try and work out how the world should collaborate in order to defuse these crises. It's a very, very difficult set of issues. Science and technology are both the cause and the solution. So how do we manage to ensure that gap between the cause and the solution is bridged? And that really is the role of ethics and values. By the way, any doubt, and there is quite a lot of doubt about climate change not being man-made, can be dispelled by the recent Nobel Prize in Physics awarded this year to these three scientists who have shown with great certainty, a high degree of certainty, that climate change that we're experiencing globally is a result of man-made influence. Let me touch on plastic pollution just briefly. I don't have time to go into each one of these crises in great depth today, so I'll just touch on three of them. A report from the World Economic Forum in 2016. Each year, at least 8 million tons of plastics leak into the ocean, which is the equivalent to dumping the contents of one garbage truck into the ocean every 60 seconds. And there's an image there just to remind you of what we're talking about. There's a lovely river, which is close to the ocean, and here comes all the plastic rubbish. So the report continues that the ocean is expected to contain 1 ton of plastic for every 3 tons of fish by 4 years' time, not far away. And by 2050, that magic time when we're supposed to have zero air pollution, there will be, it is estimated, more plastics than fish in the ocean. So here's the known impact at the moment on the wildlife in the marine environment. I suppose what is more important at the moment is what's the impact on us, on humanity, particularly when we consume the products of the marine environment. I mean, we all love fish. I think Indonesia is one of my great places to eat ikan. And we have to be really mindful of the extent to which these microplastics, which when you put plastics into the ocean, they don't dissolve like gula in tea. They actually get smaller and smaller, so they become nanoparticles, microparticles. And those particles of plastic are consumed, as you can see below, by seabirds and by fish. And they get into the food chain. So the question is, how much of this are we consuming as human beings, and how much is that going to be causing us long-term health problems? I think it's best summed up by this cartoon, which is kind of funny and sad at the same time. You know, we come from the ocean, we've risen to the heights of humanity, and we're now destroying the very origins of our species and of other species. Let me touch on biodiversity loss. The Living Planet report published last year called Bending the Curve of Biodiversity Loss, trying to reduce the amount of biodiversity loss that we see in the planet. So a couple of sentences from that report. In 1970, our ecological footprint was smaller than the Earth's rate of regeneration. In other words, our impact on the ecology of the planet was enough that the planet could recover. We could use the natural resources, but those natural resources were being replenished. Today, however, in order to feed and fuel our current 21st century lifestyles, we are actually overusing the Earth's biocapacity by at least half. So in other words, we need at the moment another half a planet to support the way in which we're indulging ourselves in our 21st century comfortable lifestyles. And as we go forward, of course, we're going to need more than half a planet. We're going to need an entire extra planet. I'll bring this home to you in a rather poignant manner. Indonesia, Sumatra, in fact, is the home of this beautiful orangutan, the Tapanuli orangutan. And the map will show where its habitat is. That's little orange blotch. There's another form of orangutan further north in the Aceh area. But down there in that little orange blotch is currently what is left of the habitat of this lovely orangutan. And just consider these facts. In 1890, that's about 120 years ago, the range of this orangutan, the local species, was over 40,000 square kilometers. Today, that's been reduced to 1,000 square kilometers. 2.5% of its original range has disappeared. Why? Because of deforestation. Why do we have deforestation? The two major causes are clearing the forest in order to have agriculture, from palm forests to food production for local villages, but mainly palm plantations, and of course, illegal logging. This is one of the most threatened of the great apes worldwide, and we're down to the last 800 living in that little orange patch up there. Now, I'm not just pointing the finger at Indonesia here. There's a book recently released called The Sixth Extinction, and worldwide, we are losing species, not just orangutans, but all species rapidly. And Australia, in fact, is one of the leaders of this terrible blight on humanity. You know, we too, in our country, are cutting down the forests and reducing the ecosystems and habitats for species. And there's no doubt that this has to stop. All right, that's the doom and gloom. Now let me do some blue sky thinking, and let's see that there is a way forward. A colleague, Professor Glenn Albrecht at the University of Sydney, in recent times has said there is a way out of this Anthropocene era, but not by thinking inside it, by thinking outside of it. And by talking about something that he calls the Symbiocene or Symbiocene is the new era that he would like to promote. So what in fact is that? Well, it's based on the word symbiosis, which in Greek means companionship. So if you think about an era of enhanced companionship amongst all living things, both humans and non-humans, there are four basic principles to this. First, there is mutuality. That is, we recognize that we're living together for mutual benefit and interdependence. The second is ecological. There's an interconnectedness of all living things, humans and non-humans, plants and animals and humans. There's an ethics involved in the Symbiocene era, the ethics of natural justice, which leads to cooperation. Yes, there is conflict, but cooperation is the overriding concern of the natural world in order for it to regenerate and to thrive. And biophilia, which I think is sadly missing from our lives in terms of our relationship with the natural world. It's about the love of life and life forms. So these four principles or aspects, if you like, of the Symbiocene era, I think are really important for us to reach out to others and to the natural world. And I'm going to talk a little bit in a moment about how we might bring that into education through transformative learning. There is a TED talk that you can see on Professor Glenn Albrecht's notion of the Symbiocene. There's a link just there. I have a love of nature. I live in a beautiful part of the world in Australia, excuse me, in Western Australia. And here's just a little example of some of the natural occurring wildflowers. We have just enough left of our natural environment that hasn't been cut down and planted by farmers and loggers. So we too have the same problem of deforestation. But biophilia, the love of nature, to me, means that I want to take the next generation, such as my, excuse me, my grandson, to experience the natural world and to learn how beautiful and spiritually enhancing it is. And I say that deeply and meaningfully because I think education is another vehicle for engaging students with their love of the natural world. And too much of that has gone missing given our metropolitan lifestyles. So let me give you now some global perspectives on the issues that I've just been talking about and how we might turn things around. So Klaus Schwab, the executive director of the World Economic Forum, in 2017 published a book called The Fourth Industrial Revolution. In that he says, as knowledge and discoveries progress, our focus and commitment to having ongoing moral and ethical discussions is critical. And a little later, last year, in Stakeholder Capitalism, another book, he goes on to say that we need a society, an economy, and an international community that is designed to care for all people and the entire planet. So you can see that there's a shift here going on in terms of our relationship with each other and with the natural world. And in order to reconceptualize and reconfigure it, we really need to have conversations around the should word, the moral and ethical issues that we need to confront. Carter Roberts, President and CEO of the World Wildlife Fund, in his report on the living planet, Bending the Curve of Biodiversity Loss, says, a deep cultural and systemic shift is urgently needed. A transition to a society and economic system that recognizes that we depend on nature much more than nature depends on us. I mean, it could be argued that if humanity disappears from the face of the earth due to all of these crises that we're having, including the pandemics, that nature will actually recover and it will evolve independently of us. So while we're here, we really need to treat nature in a way that is recognizes how much we depend on it. Former head of the United Nations Development Programme, Professor Gus Speth, says that the top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with these, we need a cultural and spiritual transformation. In other words, a new consciousness. It's not just about knowing more. It's not just about education that fills people with facts and scientific knowledge, etc., or the development of new technologies. It's how we use the new technologies to enhance our lifestyles and to protect the planet, our ecosystems, our biosphere. So to do that, we need to transform the way in which we think about ourselves, our identities, our relationship with each other, and with the natural world. The United Nations released a report, Transforming Our World, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. There are three principles basically embedded in the report. One is that sustainable development means we should be taking care of the well-being of humanity and the planet, both inextricably interlinked, not one without the other. That there's an intergenerational commitment. We should be thinking about our children, our grandchildren, etc., into the future. What is the legacy that we are leaving them? And there's a moral imperative associated with the development of ethical values that is absolutely essential in order to promote sustainable development. So let me bring this into education. Here's what I call the standard model of science, technology, engineering, mathematics learning. And it's pretty much my experience throughout high school, secondary education, and university when I studied science and physics and so on. Students sit in the laboratory, in the lecture room, and the lecturer stands out the front and directs their attention to the outer world, the world outside of the classroom, the world of objects, systems, and patterns. And the students are expected to develop their understandings, they do laboratory work, and they develop this objectivity, which is that they are separate from the natural world and they must treat it in that way, in an objective way. So we developed, by the time I finished my Bachelor of Science in Physics, very much an objective knowledge and an objective set of values that were separate from me, but all about the world outside of me. Transformative model of STEM learning, on the other hand, focuses on both the outer world and the inner world of students. So as well as developing their concepts and their skills and their objectivity, we need to do more than that. We need to develop their subjectivities, their intersubjectivities, recognizing that students bring with them their inner worlds, and we need to be developing those inner worlds as well as the excuse me, our understanding of the outer world. We need to acknowledge students' lived experiences, their cultural capital they bring with them. We need to recognize and value their social values and help them to understand better their values and the feelings, because it's our emotional capital that supports our belief systems, that underpins our identities. And this is an interactive approach to education, where we're developing students' understanding of both the outer world and their inner worlds. Call this holistic knowledge and the development of social values. So, transformative learning. Here's an image that might speak to you. It's about learning to look outside of the frames of reference that we've been inserted in through our family lives and our education systems, not rejecting these frames of reference, but being aware of them in the first instance, because they're often invisible to us, and then being able to look outside of our own particular frames of reference, in other words, our values and our beliefs and our understandings of the world and our place in that world, and to see others and to understand their frames of reference. There has been a huge amount of scholarship undertaken in the last over 100 years in the area of transformative learning. And here are some of the leaders from the Western academies, and I'm happy to tell you that my colleagues in Nepal are adding to this scholarship base by drawing on their own religious and philosophical traditions. So what we're trying to do then is to develop in our students a certain set of capabilities through transformative learning experiences. The first is mutual understanding. And this is about, as I said earlier, understanding each other and understanding our relationship with the natural world, enhancing that, learning to be empathic, learning to be compassionate, learning to be kind, and learning to, in the case of the natural world, understand our essential relationship with it. We need our students to indulge in critical social thinking, and I think here we come close to political science education. We need our students to understand what are the obstacles to achieving the ideal. Why is there such a crisis, environmental crisis in the world? What is the cause of them? You know, how much is technology a problem, and how much is the way in which we use technology, our own values? How much of a problem is that? So it's both, again, looking outwards and looking inwards, understanding the way in which we are complicit in reinforcing the problems, the social problems. And this looking inwards is just so important to understand our own identities, our own value systems, our own frames of reference. And then going beyond that, developing a vision of how the world could be better, and then the next step, how it should be better. That's the ethical and visionary valuing. And finally, instead of just being a classroom-based activity, this is where students are engaged in activities beyond the classroom, in the school grounds, in the local community, which is a way of then arming them with a sense of agency as citizens once they graduate from school, that they can take into their family lives, local communities, and their professions, and wherever it is that they happen to go in life. We're trying to arm them with these higher level capabilities that will be with them for the rest of their lives and enable them to become leaders and decision makers in the context of sustainable development. So just summing up here we have the really important science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, disciplinary knowledge, skills, and values that are usually promoted through the standard model. And here is the transformative learning capabilities that we want to develop in our students so that we educate their inner worlds at the same time. So here's the big challenge for educators. How do we do this? How do we find a way for these two forms of education to interact? And here's where we turn to the arts. We bring the arts into STEM. By the arts, I mean the literary arts, the visual arts, and the performing arts. And these are so important in our lives because they contribute to the development of our creativity, our aesthetics, our sense of beauty, very, very strongly towards our ethical values, ethics of eco-justice and social justice in particular. And equally importantly, they help us to develop our communication skills, our ability to be able to express and persuade others. So the arts bring with them these absolutely essential learning capabilities. In the last 10, 15, 20 years, we've been bringing the arts into STEM education in the context of postgraduate teacher education. And the authors of this book, my graduate students, the graduate students of my editor, co-editor, Balchandra Luitel, who's currently Professor and Dean of Education at Kathmandu University in Nepal. And our contributing authors, I asked them to give me photographs of their children, because what we're about is the future lives of these children. Transformative education for sustainable development is about the future lives of our children and their children. So this book was published in 2019, and each one of the authors will speak about their experience of going through transformative learning in their postgraduate research in master's and PhD degrees, because you can't teach something that you haven't learned yourself. And these guys, these girls and these men have developed these transformative learning capabilities and taken them back to their places of work. And as I said earlier, there are at least 4 universities in Indonesia where this is being practiced in teacher education programs. This is a book that is coming out very soon, next year, early next year. And this is now the focus on STEM education in schools and undergraduate programs in these levels of education and in these countries. And I guess you'll be pleased to know that we have some contributors from Indonesia as well. I'll give you one example, and I'll skip this one, and I'll give you an example of with Dr. Yuli Ramawati at the Universitas Negeri Jakarta. She's the head of chemistry education. She runs a Master of Teaching program in chemistry. She teaches students who are going to become teachers all about the chemistry of the world, the disciplinary knowledge, the skills, etc. She also, at the same time, engages her students in issues of sustainability by focusing on the everyday use of chemicals. And she develops what are called ethical dilemma stories. So on the one hand, chemicals are really important for economic purposes. The chemistry of our food, the chemistry of our clothing, the chemistry of our transport systems, the chemistry of just about everything you can imagine in life is helping us to move forward. On the other hand, chemistry is also one of the great environmental pollutants. So, I'll come to an example of that in just a moment. What she does is gets her master's students in their final research projects to develop these ethical dilemma stories and to go out into local schools and do action research with them. And here's one example. So in the chemistry topic of acids and bases, in the local community, one of the students noticed that the local laundries, which are springing up everywhere, great economic development for local community, what do they do with their waste detergent water? It's simply released into the natural environment. It runs down the drains and it goes into the local river. And when it gets to the local river, that acidic detergent, laundry detergent, raises the pH levels of the local river system. Now, you can imagine that if you multiply the number of laundries by 10 or 100 or 1,000, the impact on the riverine ecosystems is not good. So she has developed this way of teaching where she brings into chemistry classes the issue of pollution and uses dilemma teaching to help her students to develop those transformative learning capabilities. The understanding of the negative impact on the natural world, that's the social critique, examining their own value systems so that they ask themselves, do we think that this is a good idea or a bad idea? And then trying to find solutions to ensure that there is something that filtering systems, for example, that are in place that actually prevent that environmental damage from taking place. That's one little example of what is going on in STEM education and chemistry education from a transformative learning perspective. There'll be much more on this particular example in the book that we're releasing early next year, along with many other examples. So let me just reach a conclusion here by saying, tongue-in-cheek, the Earth without art is just not much at all. So STEM cannot afford to go forward without embracing the arts if STEM is going to be socially responsible and help our students to develop the important transformative learning capabilities that are going to enable them to become agents of problem solving and change in relation to the environment. I'll leave you with one quote from the Earth Charter. The choice is ours: form a global partnership to care for Earth and one another, or risk the destruction of ourselves and the diversity of life. Fundamental changes are needed in our values, our institutions, and our ways of living. We must realize that when basic needs have been met, human development is primarily about being more, not just having more. So there's a number of references if any of you are interested in going into this in a little more deep manner. So terima kasih banyak. Thank you very much for your kind attention. I'll hand back to the chair.
The transformation of education and the core values of the current requirement that for sustainable development. So the presentation has been very informative, particularly on how Professor Taylor has established his thought from the problem of pollution, the calamity that because of the human itself, and then how we should transform the ideas to become, and then through this STEM education, we should establish a generation that concern not only for themselves, but concern for the whole being of the universe. Thank you, Professor Taylor. For the question, we will collect all the questions together. And I will make sure that the host to record all the questions that may be posed in the chat room. Please, brother in the host, please check all the questions that raised in the chat room, please. So in order to be just to another speakers, now we move to the third speakers. There will be around 20 to 30 minutes time, and then we will go with Professor Zikri. So now let me move to Professor Robert. Thank you, President. We will discuss. We come back to you later on. Robert ada? Okay, let's go to Professor Zikri Muhammad. Professor Zikri.
Yeah. I'm online.
Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Apa kat sana?
Baik saja.
Banyak sehat insyaallah nah.
Insyaallah, Prof. Ya.
Masyaallah.
Allah Akbar.
We are sorry for delaying the time for the opening ceremonies.
All right.
Due to so many circumstances.
Yeah.
But at least better late than never.
Yeah, right. Of course.
In Southeast Asia, which is not appropriate actually. Okay, before we invite Professor Zikri to present his paper, I would like to introduce him to all the participants. Professor Zikri is an academic staff from Policy Studies Section, Faculty of Business, Economic and Social Development, University, Malaysia, Terengganu. He holds Bachelor of Business Administration from University Putra Malaysia and Master of Art from University of Science Malaysia, and continue his PhD at University Kebangsaan Malaysia. You have several alumni here, Prof. Zikri.
Yeah.
And in fact, you have several students also here. And we are very happy to have you.
Yeah, right.
And then his current research interests include urban government, local government study, and environmental management and sustainable development. He has published several articles in international journals, books, and proceedings. He also has presented and published his research papers in several local and international conferences. So we are very lucky because we have three distinguished speakers, scholars, from Professor Espinal, Professor Taylor, and now Professor Zikri from Terengganu. So without further ado, I would like to invite Professor Zikri to present his paper. Please, Professor. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Sir Chairman, Professor Muhammad. Let me share my slide first. Right. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Alhamdulillah. Syukur kita kehadap Ilahi kerana dengan limpah kurnianya dapat kita bertemu pada hari ini dalam satu majlis yang amat mulia yang semoga dirahmati Allah Subhanahu Wa Taala. First of all, I would like to thanks to Unimal, especially Bapak Rektor Unimal and organizer of this conference for inviting me as speaker for today's conference. Honorable Unimal Rektor Profesor Dr. Herman Fitra, Vice Rector Ibu Juli Mursyida, all Vice Rector, Dekan Fisip, kawan rapat saya Dr. Nazaruddin, all Deans, all Chairperson Conference, Organizer, Presenter, and Participant. For today, sharing, I call it for sharing session for today. So I would like to share my previous research on local government service efficiencies, on the public participation matters, right? So let me start with these pictures, right? Let me start with these pictures. I believe that every one of us feel peacefully when we can see the beautiful scenery every day in our life, right? So we can see that the things as the nature, the positive way that we can absorb to our body. So everybody want to live in the clean environment, especially in urban area. So we want to breathe with the clean air, clean water, clean food, and so on. And I believe that the government has taken every step to improve their services in order to provide the best services to make sure all the citizens can live in a clean environment. As we can see, I can share in Malaysia, this picture shows the beach in Penang. Maybe some of the participants or maybe some of the presenters have been there before. And maybe for one of them or anybody that can already pursue their degree or their S2 atau S3 di USM, I think they can remember back this place. So, and also I want to share the river in the Malacca town, the Bandar Malacca, where the river cross the town. See, we can see the clean river in the middle of the town, right? Since we have almost 2 years for movement control order, most of the river recover back from the pollution that we can see in these pictures. There is clear water for the pictures in the river, right? The river is the middle of the town, right? So these two pictures shows that the urban area is very clean and peacefully mind for us, right? So So for Malaysia, we are moving to implement all the 70 SDG, yaitu Sustainable Development Goal, in order to protect the environment with the high income economy. Today, every country, I believe, in the world have moved to the Sustainable Development Goals or Sustainable Development Plan for their country's development. And I'm sure all of us can recognize the Sustainable Development Goal symbol from the number 1 until 17. So this is common lah. This is common thing that we can hear, we can read in the media social, in the article that we write, that we wrote, and then everybody knows about this. So it is because of most of the urban area right now is located in the water body, as I mentioned before this by speakers, also shows the importance of the Sustainable Development Goal. As we know, this town or urban or cities, earlier development is located in a water body. As mentioned by Professor Peter before, there is a microplastic pollution in the ocean. And this is already proof that the fish that we eat today has a microplastic in their body. So we need to aware that the pollution can give harm to our healthy, right? So this is another scenario, right? This is a scenario where the pollution still happen. The pollution still happen in all over the world. I believe every country face the same problem for this situation, right? So this is because of rapid development of the city without a full proper plan for me, right? Based on our last research, our last study, we can find that we need the proper plan for each of the urban development land use, right? For the time being, we have a project, what we call a marine spatial planning, that we try to allocate the economic activities, the residential activities, the city center in order to avoid the conflict, right? As we know that people from the rural area mostly migrate to the city to find a better place and the economic wealth. Based on the United Nations has revealed that 56.2% of the global population now live in the cities. The biggest change has been happened in the Latin America and the Caribbean, with 81.2% of the population living in urban areas, up to 41.3% in 1950. And as we know, the economic growth and environmental performance must go hand in hand. And that the natural environment in the central to the economic activity and growth, providing the resources that we need to produce goods and services, and absorbing the processing unwanted byproduct in the form of pollution and waste, right? So this is the question we need to address. We need to give the awareness to the people, give the awareness to all the citizens. Try to avoid, try to give a good suggestion, try to give good example in order all over the world. We have to protect our nation. We have to protect our environment. Even though we have to plan for the economy, but we cannot forget the harmful to the environment. So as we can see, still we have the problem on waste, right? So this is the report about the municipal waste. Every day we throw the rubbish from the house and so on. So where is the waste goes, right? Where is the waste go? Because when we throw the rubbish not in proper way, if we go, I think it goes to the ocean, right? It goes to the ocean at the end of the day, right? So the question is, who is responsible? Who is responsible for this matter? Everybody wants to avoid from their responsible. Either either is it a federal government responsibility, or state government, or local government, or private company, or each of us, or the citizen of the country, right? So this is, we need to think, we need to identify, we need to have to get the collaboration for each other in order to solve our problem on waste management, right? So in Malaysia, right? In Malaysia, we know that we have several structure of the government. The top one, we got the federal government, right? The top one. And then we got the state government and the local government, right? For that structure of the local the local government is the lowest and the frontliner of the government structures. Most of the physical plan in Malaysia, especially of development plan, will proposed by the local authority. The local authority is responsible for the urban development, especially to provide the needs of the local citizen. So it means that the local government had a big responsibility in order to give the good, proper plan to the federal and the state government. So for me, this is the crucial part where if the proper plan by local government, it will give the positive impact to the environment. So in order to answer who is responsible, as we know that each of us need to be responsible to make sure of our environment are clean. It's not only the government or the private company, but we as a good citizen need to be part of that. And I believe that the responsible citizen, most of us want to contribute to this matter. However, from my research and observations, we found that local authority are more likely to choose only some of the information given by the local community to improve their service delivery efficiency. So this may be due to the law of involvement by the local community for dissemination of information to the local authority. This scenario will cause the conflict between the local authority and the local community priority. And local authorities should take into account the local community view in measuring the service delivery efficiency to create the livable city, because we want to live in the peaceful, we want to live in the clean environment, we want to live in whatever is good for our community. All right. And then I would like to share, right? I would like to share before this, in general, most of the citizens want to get the high level of service delivery efficiency from the government, especially for the basic service for the life. For example, water supply, right, road safety, and so on. And then a good governance is based on the fully support by the citizen in the implementation of the National Development Program, right? The service delivery efficiency by the local authority is the one of the key element in developing in livable cities. And then from the my observation and my thing, we suggest that government should listen to the people's views about the priority needs in service delivery performance, because we know that the local government is the frontliner who are serve the citizen, right? In general, from my previous study in Malaysia, we found that the level of service delivery efficiencies by the local authority from customer perspectives are at the high level of complaining services and the community services and environmental management, meaning that these three services offered by local authority have the more attention, have the can attract the attention of the citizen to take part. The local authority need to pay more attention on the basic amenity services such as waste management, street maintenance, drainage, river management, and the cleaning of public area, right? You know that we want to live in a good environment, so this such of basic amenities or basic service need to be fulfilled by the local government. And besides that, local authority must be monitored all the aspect maintaining regarding the light and street, right? The community services, the environmental management services. So this is the basic need to be provided by the local authority right? So the study also found that the level of public participation in planning that we talked about before and improving service delivery efficiency are still at low level, right? More than 61% respondents state that they are not involved any plans or improvement in service delivery by local authority. So this is the crucial part where we need to get involved, citizen, local people, in order to plan the urban or the city's area. So besides that, more than 53 respondents are not aware about the right to contribute ideas in the planning, improving, or development program provided by local authority. This also the signal that people are not aware. People don't know where to go to give their ideas. This also, study also found that less than 35% of the public of the respondents that are involved, 35% are involved in public hearing for local area plan. In Malaysia, we got a local area plan where the local authority we call for the public hearing. So from our finding, only 35% of the our respondent, get involved in public hearing. And most of the respondents doubt that their views will use in preparing local plan area. So the people say that if I give the opinion or I give the suggestion, is it the government will use my opinion or not? So this shows that they are lacking on the awareness of the public, right? Most of the respondents also doubt on that part. And then from this finding also shows that involvement of local people still low in development planning. As I said before, we need to give some awareness in order to invite or in order to get involved all the public or majority of the citizen, majority of the resident, in order to provide the good planning for the cities or urban area. So actually the public participation effort are the crucial component to all the planning project, especially in urban area. And then public involvement is a two-way communication process between the public and the government agencies that aims at incorporating the diverse, right, citizen views, concern, and the issue into the decision-making process. And for me, public involvement activity that prove most valuable and successful are those that are easily accessible, relevant, and appropriate. So the current pandemic, let's look on a current example, right? So I already searched for some article that also shows that the public participation or public views need to be involved or need to be taken part on the planning. So for the current issues that we can see that research by Nick Malter on the public participation in crisis policy making. So how 30,000 Dutch citizens advise their government in relaxing COVID-19 lockdown. So this shows that even not only in development plan, but government also need to involve all the citizens, all the some of the citizens that can give their good suggestion, their good value opinion in order solve the crisis, right? Right now we are facing the COVID-19. So we need to ask the citizen, we need to ask the people who can give the good suggestion in order how to solve the crisis. The government today cannot say that they already know everything. Because of the technologies now, people can know everything, almost everything happen in the world. So this is the key point or the most important part where we need to get involved the public in order to get a good solving or good to solve the crisis, right? And then this also another papers that shows that the community participation approach for effective national COVID-19 pandemic, right? So we know that this is the most important part, right? proved by these articles and proven by my previous research on the local government. So we need to get involved all the citizens. We need to get some ideas from the citizen, right? Okay, and then this also another research done by Claudia. It's about the public and patient participation in health policy, care and the research. So for me, for the public participation is very crucial part for the crisis, for the development, for the development, or in order to get some idea for the policy makers, decision making, and so on, right? So this the idea of public participation is based on the democratic system actually to protect the right of individual and the public interest. As I said before, we need to get involved people, especially in the local area, in order to develop a good, proper plan, right? Public participation is seen as important element in good governance, especially in protect our environment. Most of the local people, as we know, they have their local knowledge about the surrounding area. So when we get involved, the local people, then the local people will give some knowledge of the local knowledge. Now I involving the marine spatial planning for the coastal area from the Kuala Terengganu and the Kuala Nerus area, where we try to make a proper plan for the area citizen, for the industry, for the fishing area, and so on. This value knowledge should be included in any development plan, and then the public participation in development program and improvement of the service delivery has been suggested as the effective way to achieve sustainable development and brings a lot of positive impact to the society. And I believe that not only in Malaysia, but also in Indonesia or in Philippines or any other world, right? The government must listen to the citizen, right? The government must listen to the citizen, whatever the plan they want to implement it, right? In Malaysia, we got a local area plan, then provided by local authority. Before they gazetted the local area plan, so they need doing the public hearing in order to get the suggestion, in order to get the opinion. This is the good step for me in order to get the proper and the sustainable development plan, especially the land use of each area of the city. So we try to avoid the misuse of the land, right? So as we can see, everybody I think know the Twin Tower in KL. So as we can see that people can go around without any concern or without any worry about the pollution, about the waste and so on. This is where we try to give a good suggestion. We try to give suggestion to the government. In order to plan, we need the opinion or suggestion from the public participation. And then this also the picture that shows that the clean area for the park in the middle of the Kuala Lumpur. Then for the example, right, as we can see in this picture, this is Kuala Terengganu right now. We try to plan for this plan in order to give a good scenario for positive impact for the economy and the environment. So right now we are the first drawbridge, right, in the air in the Asia that we get in Terengganu. So as we can see, there is a beautiful scenery, a beautiful picture, beautiful view in order to attract the people to come. So I think this is the example where the government takes the opinion from the people, from the local people in order to develop the sustainable development area for the cities. So for that, I close my talk today. Then I pass back to the Mr. Chairman, Professor Muhammad. Thank you.
As presented on the issue of sustainable development dependent on the participation of the local people, particularly on the policy formulation, so that a better policy for urban development could be achieved, like what had been shown, the achievement of Terengganu government. Congratulations to all keynote speakers. And I would like to please host, could you please all pop up all the speakers from Professor Aspinall and then Professor Peter Taylor, Professor Robert, and Professor Zikri. Tolong itu dikasih nampak screen-nya semuanya. Ada Prof. Robert? Ada? Nggak nampak di sini. So now we invite Prof. Robert. Okay, Prof. Robert. Oh, welcome, Prof. Robert.
Yes.
Good afternoon. Hey.
Yeah.
Almost afternoon, of course.
Almost. Thank you very much, the moderator. Do you listen or do you hear my voice?
Yeah. Very clear, but a bit, of course, a bit disturbing, not very clear.
Okay. Thank you very much. The title of my presentation is the cultural tradition and cultural creativity based on local wisdom, or the transformations from cultural tradition to cultural creativity based on local wisdom. As the result of my research, the method I applied is philosophical basis is empirisms, and paradigm I applied is phenomenology, and of course this is the qualitative research design with the model of grounded research. And the approach I applied is anthropolinguistics with the type of research, research and development. So this is very important to keep so that we can understand the content of my presentations. So that's why there are three variables or three important things that I'm going to discuss here in my presentations. First of all is cultural traditions, and the second is cultural creativity, and then the third one is the transformations from cultural tradition to cultural creativity based on local wisdom. So let me just say, present or discuss about cultural traditions. Cultural traditions is defined as the community's traditional activities inherited orally from one generation to another generations. So the characteristics of cultural traditions are standard. It means that the cultural traditions characteristic is common, devolved, being regulated, or being the type of that is encountered in the normal course of events. For example, the type of certain traditional clothes in our country, maybe in Aceh and also in North Sumatra, are used for certain cultural traditions, such as Batak, traditional clothes ulos, called ulos, given by wife giver party and received by wife receiver party. So this is the standard regulations in cultural traditions. And the second characteristics or the second features is contextual, which means being bound to or dependent on the context of the activities. Again, for example, the type of certain traditional clothes we call ulos are used in life cycle ceremonies. So this is the context on which cultural traditions ulos is used. And the third characteristics is natural, which means original, pure, or real, as it is without any tendencies of significant changes. For example, pure traditional clothes, ulos, are used in life cycle ceremonies, and then it is just say the real context of the cultural traditions of traditional clothes ulos is given. As the term indicates, cultural traditions tends to be traditional, which is depicted by pre-scientific, rural or agrarian, resistant to change and innovations, bound by perceptions to the past, culturally static, and peacefully oriented. These cultural traditions are necessary to be revitalized as a cultural heritage for the local people's way of life or civilizations. The cultural office, like Department of Culture, Dinas Kebudayaan, in the local government, needs to focus on this task. So again, this is the task of those who are interested or focused on culture or culture, to say, revitalizations. So this is the first thing that I have to say to discuss. And the second one is cultural creativity. What I mean cultural creativity is the community's modern activities created innovatively on the basis of cultural traditions in order to enhance their social welfare and peace. The characteristics of cultural creativity are flexible, which means adaptable, adjustable, or able to change easily or adapt the different conditions and circumstances as they occur. For example, the type of certain traditional clothes, ulos, are not used for certain cultural traditions anymore, but they are created for fashion, for examples. For examples, when I just say the hat, when I just say put on here, it is the example of cultural creativity made from traditional clothes ulos. And the second characteristics of cultural creativity is non-contextual, which means being free or independent from the context of the activities. For example, certain traditional clothes ulos are freely designed to be creative products. And the third characteristic is artificial, which means being imitated to be pseudo or pretended like the origins. So it is not the origin anymore, but it is a pseudo origins. For example, certain traditional clothes are really designed to be creative products. And also just say to creative products made of traditional clothes are imitatively known as the derivatives of the original ulos. So as the term indicates, cultural creativity tends to be modern. Which is characterized by or as scientific, urbanized, and industrial, adaptive to change and innovations, future-oriented, culturally dynamic, and economically oriented. Cultural creativity are necessary to be preserved, to be utilized for the creative economy and tourism. So that's why the tourism office or maybe industry office such as Dinas Perindustrian and Dinas Pariwisata in Indonesia or in local government needs to focus on the text. So this is the second thing that I discussed here, and the third one is the local wisdom. The local wisdom-based transformation means here, local wisdom is the cultural value or social norms of cultural traditions being applied to wisely manage the community's social order and to solve the social problems. So the transformation based on local wisdom connect cultural tradition to cultural creativity. So it means that we can make creative products as many as possible, but the transformation is based on the local wisdom. Based on the third topics or variables that I just discussed, this is the model of transformations from cultural tradition to cultural creativity. So we can just say make the model, and it is to say can be applied by designers, by industrial, just say creative party, or everyone who is going to make creative products based on cultural traditions. This is the end of my presentations, and the example of the ulos, for example, traditional clothes from North Sumatra. This is the traditions, I mean the product of cultural traditions, and this is, for example, the model of cultural creativity made in traditional clothes. I think this is the end of my presentations. I return it to the moderator. Thank you.
Robert Sibarani for very brief and exhausted presentation. And exactly, the time is now 11:50. And now we enter into panel discussion with all speakers. Please, the host, if you could pop up all the speakers, please, on the screen. Semua speakers. Okay. Could you please, all speakers, please, to be pop up on the screen? I would like to see Professor Edward Espinal there, Professor Peter Taylor. All right. We come back, Professor Edward, Professor Taylor, Professor Zikri. And from the chat, we have one question that addressed to Professor Edward Aspinall. The question is, does the COVID-19 pandemic have a chance to create a political crisis, especially in terms of relation between countries? This, did you get the question, Prof?
I got the
Edward?
question. Thank you. Yes. So thank you for the question. It's a good one. And obviously the COVID-19 pandemic has been associated with many political crises domestically. Its primary function, I believe, however, has been to accelerate existing political dynamics domestically. And I believe that its international effects are likely to be similar. So in particular, the really obvious case I think we can talk about are those tensions associated with the rise of China, where China is becoming increasingly assertive as an emerging dominant power, and that it's challenging the position not only of the United States, but also of neighboring countries, both in the South China Sea, but also on its other borderlands. In particular, we've seen recent border clashes with India. So we can see that the COVID-19 pandemic has not so much created a political crisis between China and its rivals, but is used as an arena in which that existing great power competition plays out. So we see that, for example, most obviously in the politics of vaccine diplomacy, where China, even if we talk about Southeast Asia, China played a big role early on in delivering vaccines to many countries which could not yet access vaccines that had been developed in the United States and in and in Britain. So even in Indonesia, of course, you had the Sinovac vaccine much earlier than large supplies of the other vaccines. So that's one obvious example where we see the COVID-19 pandemic as being an arena in which this competition plays out. Also, we see it, of course, in the public positioning and investigations about the origins of the pandemic, this theory about the possibility, certainly not proved at all, that it began at the coronavirus, the virus lab in Wuhan, which is a live issue in US domestic politics in particular. And generally we see it in the sort of the positioning of China as the most successful large country in dealing with the effects of the pandemic domestically. So basically I see the pandemic not as causing a crisis between another countries, but being an arena in which the existing crises and competition are being expressed. Quite interesting, actually, when we think about China's use of the pandemic in Southeast Asia in particular. We did ask in our survey some questions about the vaccine, about public acceptance of vaccines produced in China versus those produced in Japan, Germany, other countries. And it seems there's still quite a lot of public resistance actually to Chinese-made vaccine products, especially in the Philippines, also in Thailand, that these issues become quite politicized, in fact. So, yeah, so I think it's still not clear how successful China has been in using the COVID-19 pandemic to improve its international image and therefore its position globally and in particular in Southeast Asia. Terima kasih.
Also, which is posted in the chat. Her name is Adila, a student from Malikussala University. Then she asks, basically the development aim to prosper the human, bring prosperity and so on. The existence of modernity not only provides convenience, but in turn out that behind it there is also a high risk, such as health, solidarity, mindset, bureaucracy, and so on. So will the risks that arise will always be high if a country upholds the value of a country? So she tried to ask the question, the impact of the development and the modernity toward the country itself. So I think this question is a bit general question. We could hear from Professor Taylor and from Professor Zikri and Professor Robin and also from Professor Edwina. I think let's go with Professor Taylor because he was talking about the sustainable development and the function of STEM education on promoting the value and ethical for the sustainable development. Please, Professor Taylor.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, look, it's a very wide-ranging question. The answer is yes. Yeah, there is always a risk of a country. As I read the question, I'm not sure exactly what's being asked here, but it seems that if a country sort of celebrates its own development in isolation from other countries, I think that's possibly what the question is asking. Is there a risk here? I think actually the opposite is happening. I think what we've got with globalization is an increasing, an extension of global capitalization to a single marketplace and a standardization of products and processes for consumption. And then we have global transport systems shuttling stuff around the world. Just as an aside, one of the things that really annoys me is to go to the local supermarket and I can buy fruit and vegetables from other countries any time of the year. When I was a kid in Melbourne, back in the 50s and 60s, you had seasonal fruit and vegetables only. Now, what is the price that we're having to pay environmentally for transporting consumable items from other countries? And on a speech last night, our former Prime Minister, Paul Keating, was talking about China's endeavor to look westwards towards the stands, the Kazakhstans and Tajikistans, all the way to Turkey, to Istanbul, with a view to opening up those marketplaces, but not just marketplaces, places of production. As the Chinese standard of living increases, the cost of labor also increases. So it's been a classic approach worldwide to offshore our production. Australia's lost all of its car production in recent years. Too expensive to manufacture cars here anymore because of our labor costs. So we defer the labor costs to other countries who are lower down on the economic development scale. And then we have to import all that stuff back into our own country. Well, Australia sends all the natural iron ore and aluminium and so on to China to then import back value-added products. So with this global economy, it's a two-edged sword. On the one hand, as I said, we can furnish our consumption endlessly at any time of the year, particularly fruit and vegetables. But on the other hand, just think about the transport costs in shipping all that stuff around the world. And it was shown up recently when one of the big cargo ships got stuck in the Suez Canal for weeks on end. and stopped a lot of the global shipping. So products were no longer available here. With the pandemic, we're experiencing something similar in this country, where I live in Western Australia. We're 4,000 kilometers from the East Coast, and where a lot of our imported materials are offloaded from ships and then sent across to Western Australia by trucks and rail. So those supply lines are now being choked as a result of quarantining the states from each other. So look, this is a complex issue. On the one hand, we need a global perspective. On the other hand, we also need a local perspective. So global development and local development at the same time. What we've done in recent decades is to focus only on globalization, global development. So there's a really lovely term. If you take glocal and you take local and you bring them together, you got this thing called GLOCAL, G-L-O-C-A-L, a combination of the two. And we can talk about glocalization. We can talk about it economically. We can talk about it culturally at the same time. And we can talk about having a global sensitivity and consciousness about the biosphere, about the ecosystems that constitute the planet. And we can, when you're teaching kids, you can't just give them global problems. You've got to give them local solutions at the same time. So yeah, we need this globalization perspective at all sorts of different levels in the various sectors of our community, I believe.
From Professor Taylor, where he raised the issue like local, a global issue, and then with local culture, local creativity. So there is possibility that we combine the modernity, the development, and the local creativity. That's what you mean, I think. Thank
Yeah,
you, Professor
indeed.
Taylor. Perhaps Professor Robert would like to address the question.
Thank you.
Professor, please.
I agree with Professor Peter Taylor. So we are in between traditions and modernity. So or locality and just say globalizations. But I think how to say we play a good contributions to transform to make transformations from locality to just say globalizations by just say our traditional cultural traditions to just say cultural just say creativity. So I agree with the same him that traditions and modernity or localizations or globalizations, as a matter of fact, will be just say transformed continually, and how to say we play a good role for the transformations. Thank you.
You could share some ideas on this question.
Right? Okay. All right. I agree with Professor Robert and Professor Peter right now. From my perspective, we cannot run from the negative impact when we try to modernize, actually, when we try to develop of the city, develop of the countries, like said by Professor Peter, we got an economic impact and so on. But I would like to share on, we need to also think about the pollution across the border right now, because there is no border for the pollution, maybe from Malaysia to other countries, from Indonesia to other countries. So we need to aware on that part. We cannot say that we need modernization. Yes, I agree on that part. But in the same time, we need to sustain our environment. We need to minimize. We need to minimize the pollution on that part. For me, that one is a crucial part, because we are now must remember that we are borrowing our environment from the next generation. So we need to sustain our environment first, not only to gain the economic, but also for the good health for the environment also. And if the environment good health, then also of course we are living also in the good environment. So that one from my opinion, from my suggestion.
ideas on this question, please?
From me? Okay, let me. Okay, so modernity and tradition. So the question, of course, is very difficult to answer. It's one of the fundamental questions in many disciplines, including political science, anthropology, and so on, about the relationship of modernity and tradition. But let me take a strong position on this and just say that I'm very skeptical of most attempts to express a dichotomy between modernity and tradition. There's a very good book on Indian politics called The Modernity of Tradition. And I think we can make the case that most forms of certainly political identity, maybe I'll leave it at that as a political scientist, that claim to be traditional in the contemporary world are themselves, in fact, novel historical constructs that in themselves arise out of processes of modernization. And in fact, we don't have to go far for looking for this in the Achinese context. If we go back a few years and we think about the vision of Achinese nationalism that was promoted by Tunku Hasan Ditiro, of course, he said that the whole goal of the Aceh Merdeka movement and of Achinese nationalism was to recreate or reclaim Achinese tradition. But in fact, the vision that he promoted was very, very different from anything that had appeared previously in Achinese history. It was very different, for example, of the discourse surrounding the Hikayat Perang Sapil and all of that sort of literature from the war against the Dutch. So for me, I think in most cases, the forms of politics, the forms of identity and so on that claim to be traditional in the contemporary world are themselves of products of the engagement with modernization and modernity. Thank you.
About the dichotomy between the modernization and tradition, and it seemed like I agree with all the ideas, particularly on the issue that it is part of the human development, where we are gradually moving toward complexity and what we call completeness in terms of the ideas. And in that case, there should be a tradition that could be sacrificed, whether we like or not. The same thing when it goes with the modernity when it comes. So this is, I think, what we have. I'm interested in further discussion later on, perhaps with Professor Taylor, particularly on the issues of reviving the ideas of values and how he integrate through STEM education, okay, where what you call the science, technology, engineering, art, and mathematics is can be combined together in order to what you call to create a generation that could have a very integrated knowledge, that who has and at the same time the value could be developed and the idea of how they can live in symbiosis together. Man can live peacefully with the world. So the idea of capitalism that has been dominated, that exploitation, it could be minimized. And perhaps when the whole generation is consuming the ideas of symbiosis, where everybody can live together, coexistent with each other, respect each other, respect the nature, love the nature, perhaps that sustainable development could be maintained. And just like the way how Professor Zikri just mentioned to us, that through this a better future we could provide inherited to our generation. Perhaps that is my thought. Perhaps any other comment on that? We would like to welcome the participation. Please raise your hand so I can point and then state your name from your institution. And then if you want to ask the question, say it is the question. If you want to give comment, please just state it that it is a comment. Please raise your hand, and if for anyone then to want to have a question. So we have quite long time still, until 1 o'clock actually. Our discussion is 1 o'clock. But based on my discussion with the committee just now, we will end the session by 12:30. So we have 15 minutes more to discuss. And now I would like to invite the participant to participate actively in the conference. Please raise your hand and begin your question or comment, please. Anyone? Dr. Jumaat, perhaps you have any question, any comment? Please share with us. We have Dr. Fajri M. Kasim also here. But I'm not sure he's here. Well, since we don't have any question anymore, we don't have any comment. Before we
there seems to
end
be
this
something
session,
in the chat room.
I would like to everybody, every participant to activate their video so that we can take a documentation pictures. Please activate the camera. Sudah siap? Sudah siap? Satu dulu ya. The first one Okay. First picture. Shoot. Okay, dah. Second one. For documentation. Second one. Done? Okay. Okay, please activate your camera. How many scene? How many scene? Berapa itu? Berapa slide? Jadi cukup itu saja. Oh, semua saja ya. So we have 2 slides. We begin with the third slide, please. All right. We have Dr. Mukrir there. All right. 4th slide. We are very lucky because we have, in the morning, we have 500 participants of this conference. 5th slide. Alwin, please. Pause the student. 6th slide. Terus. Okay, I think enough. Yeah. Karena kan ini banyak student. All right.
Muhammad,
please come back to the first slide, brother host. Okay. I don't know what to say. I don't know how to express my happiness. Yeah, to be with all distinguished scholars on different fields, and particularly, especially Professor Edward Espinal, Professor Peter Taylor, and then Professor Robert Sabarani, and Professor Zikri. Thank you very much on behalf of the organizing committee and the university. We really highly appreciate your time, your thought, your discussion, and we hope that your paper will be presented to us. I will give you a chance. So before I close, I would like to invite the 4 speakers to give the concluding remark of this conference. With whom should we start? Should we start with the elders first?
Yes.
Oh, we start with Professor Robert Sabarani.
Okay, thank you very much.
The last speakers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. We need to conduct a good research on our ethnicity, of course, with the touch of modernity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Robert. From Zikri.
Right. Thank you for the moderator. For me, it's a good platform. This conference is a good platform to share. We can gain some new ideas that we can maybe do a collaboration for the next time. So for me, it's a good what we call sharing session. And hopefully we can see each other one day after COVID-19, right? Maybe I can go back to Smawe, right? Okay, right. Thank you for me.
All right, thank you. Professor Peter.
Yeah, look, I thoroughly enjoyed being in a conference where people come from different disciplinary backgrounds to mine. And that's kind of what I'm promoting here with this thing called STEAM. Now, the arts, but also it includes the humanities, and it stretches right out. The way forward in education is to provide meaningful learning experiences that relate to students out of school lives and their futures. And we can't do that just by putting them in a maths class or a science class. If we get a synergy, an interdisciplinary synergy between the different disciplines, and I'm talking about elementary, SMP, SMR, university, teacher education in particular, because the future teachers are the people who are going to have the big cascade effect. One teacher, 30 kids, and that's the future for sustainable development.
Thank you very much for sharing with us the STEM education. And then Professor Edward Aspinall with Bahasa Aceh. With Bahasa
Bahasa Indonesia saja, Pak. Malu nanti kalau saya berusaha untuk berbahasa Aceh. No, I want to echo what the other speakers said. Thank you for this opportunity. Saya senang sekali bisa bergabung kembali di Aceh walaupun secara virtual. Kebetulan saya lama sekali tidak bisa ke Aceh. Terakhir kalau tidak salah tahun 2014.
Aceh the best.
Aceh the best. Aceh is still in my heart. So I'm looking forward very much to return to Aceh one day, to come to Lok Sumawe, one of my favorite towns in all of Aceh, all of Indonesia, and all of Southeast Asia, actually. So I wish you very much the best in Universitas Maliku Saleh. It's been a few years since I've been there. I have many dear friends from the university, from Lok Sumawe, from Aceh Utara, and Birun, of course. So looking forward one day to seeing you all in person, and I wish the very best to everybody at Unimal. Thank you very much.
Thank you
Terima
very much.
kasih.
Actually, we hope with Professor Aspinall and Professor Robert and Professor Zikri, we already have a very good cooperation already with research, and then some of our lecturer also has continued their study for PhD in Terengganu University, where Professor Zikri were lecturing over there. And we hope in the future we'll have a good cooperation and perhaps research cooperation with not only with Professor Aspinall, Professor Robert, Professor Zikri, but also with Professor Charles Taylor, particularly on the STEM education, because we have engineering also, and we have educational faculty also. So we could have a very good collaboration in that. And the idea of integrated discipline of knowledge is very, very actually is needed for the time being. So I would like to thanks a lot. Thanks thousands of thanks to all the speakers, despite of their busyness, hectic time with all the research and all the projects, but they still can provide us the time to be with us in this second conference. I hope in the third conference also we will have more keynote speaker professors like you and your friend together. So with this, we will develop a networking of academic, and that will be, inshallah, support our university and for a better one, inshallah, in Aceh. Thank you very much. Before I close, I hope I could duly be just in providing the time to each speakers. If in case some speakers may have longer time, please forgive me and apologize for that. I hope it was just timely provided to everybody, inshallah. Before we end the session, I would like to thank again all our honorable speakers for the excellent and enlightened speech. We have learned a lot from them. And I also, on behalf of the university and the Faculty of Social and Political Science, would like to extend our gratitude and appreciate to all organizing committee who have worked tirelessly, sleeplessly, night to make this event took place and successful. Last but not least, on behalf of the organizing committee, we would like to thank all participants who have participated actively in this conference. We look forward to seeing you next year in the third ICoSPOLHUM 2022, inshallah. Thank you. See you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you all presenter.
Shalom.
Nice to meet you, Pak Robert.
Jangan begitu ya, Langgeli. What the fuck, man?
Alvaro Kamal.
Udah keluarin semua, Cuk. Ngakak anjing. Aceh the best.
Alvaro.
Nggak usah,